of today's conversation, which is to die before we die, which is a concept that came to me quite some time ago in my early days of awakening, so to speak. And when I first heard it, my mind was like, what in the world does that mean? Die before you die. And little did it know that it's all about the ego. That's why it doesn't understand it, because it doesn't realize that its life is so limited. The egoic personality existence is so limited in its scope and perception that at some point we have to break through. We have to train the ego to surrender and let go of its ideas, beliefs, limitations, past, future, all these concepts that it absorbed somewhere along the line. And so one of our main purposes in life is to go through this continual death process, to face the false self, the ego self, the self that creates all of these coping strategies and defense mechanisms to survive life, right? It's all useful in the beginning, as children, as little ones, we find ways to deal with the challenges and the struggles of life. But then at a certain point, we have to face our creation and dissolve it. We have to let it return from where it came, because it becomes a stranglehold on our soul's existence, right? Our soul has a destiny, and in order to fulfill that destiny or its purpose, we have to release the obstacles to that pathway. And so we use the device of suffering, which is one of the main tools to essentially, face these parts of ourselves. And you see, we can't get rid of things because everything is energy. And so instead of this idea of cutting ourselves off from or getting rid of parts of ourselves, the death process is actually about absorbing these parts of ourselves. Just like when a caterpillar is turning into a butterfly, it's not getting rid of something. It is taking what it already has, the raw elements of itself, and it's transmuting it, because that becomes the raw material in its movement towards its true self, towards its realized self, which is the butterfly, right? So we are constantly, continually going through this process of death and rebirth in this world. It's all about that, death and rebirth. And there are periods in time that we actually note astrologically, like from 28 to 32, 38 to 41. Like there are these periods where we have these little crises. And the crises it's the soul saying to the personality, we need to grow beyond who we have become. We need to expand beyond this limited perception because it's not working for us. And so the death that the caterpillar goes through is to realize its true self, its true essence, its greater aspect of itself. So then it can have a much greater perspective of reality, right? The consciousness expands. So even though one may perceive like the caterpillar suffering, in its chrysalis, what's going on? Who is it in this moment in time, in this state of goo? Who am I when I'm in this state of dissolution, when I'm dying to the previous iteration of myself and being reborn into this true self? Who am I? And this is the most challenging part of the death process, is to surrender into the unknown, the abyss of the unknown, the void. Because in this in-between world is where we are being upgraded, reformulated. And so the first step in the dying before you die process is to be aware that I am not any of these things that I think I am. I'm not my mind, I'm not these thoughts, I'm not this body, I'm not this reality. It's all a limited experience. This world is a limited reality called illusion, but it serves a purpose. It serves a very important purpose, and it serves the purpose of a soul raising its consciousness, of the awakening from the limited third dimensional five sensory reality to the expanded multidimensional soul-based, I call it the new paradigm, moving from the fear-based third dimensional human reality to the multidimensional soul-based heart-centered reality, from an intellectual entity to a heart-centered intuitive entity. So the first step is the awareness that I am in a limited state of consciousness at this point in time, and I'm here to break through this limitation, to realize something much greater, to move from the caterpillar perspective to the butterfly perspective. But most of us don't even know this because we get so caught up in the day-to-day reality of life, right? We get so caught up in the 9 to 5, the programming of this reality, that if something doesn't happen internally to say, I'm opting out of the program, then you can live your whole life stuck in the matrix. And so it takes the courageous soul to begin to ask questions. What is my life all about? Is this all there is? Is there something more? What is my purpose? Who am I? Right? You ask that question, who am I? And you begin the process of dying. Because every time the ego comes up with an answer, your response is not that. I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. And then the ego has nothing else to say. Well, if you're not any of these things, then what are you? Who are you? This contemplation is so important because it gets us to the edge of the cliff of the unknown. Because you realize, I'm not going to realize this truth by staying in this little egoic perspective. So we get to the edge of the cliff and we take a leap of faith. And we start to have different experiences. And we start to let go of the past, the childhood. We start to deal with the wounds. We integrate our shadows. We start to call in all of our parts. And we be with them. The wounds, the upsets, the victim. And on it goes. And each time we call these parts back and we sit with them, we be with them, we support them, we heal them. Then more and more, there is no outside world. There is no blame. There is no judgment. There is no othering. Because you begin to realize that everything in the outside world has always been a reflection of my inner self. So this process of dying before you die is about accumulating all that energy that we put out there with the false self. And we start to call it all back. And we start to release everyone from our hold, from judgment, blame, anything, so that we are totally clean and clear with everybody around us. There's no cords of energy holding us back. Because you see, the goal is to leave this place with the heart totally open, heart and hands, forgiving everything and everyone. Because as long as there's cords connected to anyone, holding anyone accountable for anything in our lives, then we have to come back and revisit this over and over again. We have to fulfill our karmic tasks. And so the reason why we do this inner work is to liberate ourself from anything that imprisons us. And what imprisons us is anything we judge outside of us. What imprisons us is anything that we judge outside of us. So this is an important concept. And so ultimately, we go to the place of emptiness, where there's nothing that is holding me back, where there's no one that I am giving my energy to or blaming or thinking something has happened to me from the external world. And this is a 24/7 job to watch the mind and its thoughts and how it's operating and creating this limited reality, so that you're no longer using your energy to keep something at bay, right? Which fosters the illusion of duality. If ever there's an othering, me against something else, then that's where I am losing my center. That's where I'm losing myself. And it's very easy to do that in this world, especially in this day and age of cancel culture, where someone else is the cause of my internal state of being. Nothing is the cause, everything is the catalyst. Nothing external is the cause, I should say. For we each are the cause of our own existence, 100%. So each time I forgive, each time I let someone off the hook, I am releasing myself from that prison, from that stuckness, from the illusion of othering. And then the power comes back to me, and that energy is used for the death process, for the alchemical transformation from caterpillar to butterfly, from limited perspective to greater awareness, open-heartedness, a consciousness that includes everything. So we're moving from a dualistic reality to unity consciousness, which is a huge death. To keep letting go of duality is the task. But how do you do that when we are so in the stream, the river of duality? How does one let go of the duality of judgment, of pain and suffering, of insecurity, of fear, right? There's so many things going on at the same time inside of all of us. And it's coming towards us from the external world, from the media, movies, TV, what have you. So how do you stay centered in the self, the true self, while there's all this activity going on around us, trying to keep us in the limited perspective? So again, you realize it's all me. This is all me, and it's all my creation. And so if anything triggers me, that is my work, where I sit in the self, in that intermediary stage, and I transmute all of my shadow consciousness, all of my fears, all of my past, all of my wounds, etc., etc. And for some of us, we go through this journey called the dark night of the soul, where we have to go through cycles and cycles and cycles of death and rebirth. Some of it very, very intense, with a tremendous amount of suffering. And the greater the suffering, the greater the rise in consciousness. The greater the suffering, the chances are there's something quite significant you're here to offer the world, because that's a soul contract. To go through the dark night of the soul is a soul contract. I'm here to die a million deaths, that I may be reborn into the light anew. I'm here to die a million deaths, that I may be reborn into the light anew. And so in this culture, we're not taught anything about this process. We're not taught about the consciously dying and being reborn in a body. And I fully believe it's because we are here to be kept limited by the illusion that Maya wants to keep a cap on our consciousness. Because if many of us do this, this world's going to transform. Things are going to change on this planet and very, very quickly. But that's the whole point of this work. Just like in the meditation about with the aura growing in intensity, like the sun. Whenever you have a strong field of consciousness like that, whenever the soul has descended into the body and begins to radiate its consciousness, everything around it begins to change. You become the agent of change simply by being yourself because of the inner work that you did. That inner work is your gift to humanity. That absorption of the external world, of the Maya, of the illusion, of the sanskaras of humanity, the impressions of the past, that inner work is your service. And it's a great service. Anyone that goes to the dark night of the soul is given a boon to go through that process, because only the strong souls can go through that process. And so more and more, the mind dissolves into that greater space of the emptiness, the oneness, the unity consciousness. The mind is no longer there generating limiting thoughts and beliefs and projections, perpetuating the illusion of duality. The mind is in a space of neutral awareness, the witness. And as the witness in the emptiness, holding this level of consciousness, that presence transforms the world. And we know this. Think about figures like Jesus, who's 2,000 plus years later, and his energy is still radiating as a teaching. This death that he went through in order to ascend, right? We die that we may ascend. We burn in the ashes that we may rise. But the number one thing that really has to be dealt with is the fear of death. And this culture has it so strongly, right? Go to the doctor, go every 6 months, get a checkup, make sure you're okay. Don't get sick. Something's wrong with being sick. You failed if you're sick. You failed if you die. All of these limited beliefs and concepts, they're incorrect. It's all about death. We're dying and being reborn every day, but are we doing it consciously? We go to sleep at night, we wake up in the morning, right? We're always dying, but how are we dying? Are we aware of what we're dying to, what we need to die to, what we need to let go of? Are we aware of our patterns? What am I doing that limits my consciousness, that limits my experience in this world? And you'll know that because of the reflection of the world that comes back to you. The external world is simply our movie projected from internally. It's our own movie. So if something is happening over and over again, we've got to look at the movie and start to rewrite the script. But we can't rewrite the script if we don't clear the subconscious, if we don't die to our patterns that are lodged in that space that we're not aware of. So this is a tall order, this die before you die. But if we don't do it, we're not satisfied. Because we know deep down, we have this awareness that there's something here that I am here to experience. There's a path that I'm supposed to be on. And if we are coddled by the ego that's protecting us from going beyond the boundaries of what's comfortable, if we are continually held back by that egoic self, then we start to have a challenging existence with symptoms such as depression, anxiety, right? How many people are on antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds? You get it? They don't know how to go through this process. But the anxiety is actually the excitement of something new wanting to come in. But when you don't know how to surrender to that, you translate it incorrectly. You make it a limitation rather than expansive experience. Same thing with depression. When we go through depression, our soul is saying something is not right with life right now. Let's sit, let's go internally and check things out and see if we are off the mark, if we are sinning. That's what the sin means. It's to miss the mark. So yes, this culture has an issue with death and wants to do anything possible to prevent us from dying. And if we can't be, quote, normal in society, we should be taking some sort of med to bring us back to normal so that we can go back to our jobs and continue life the way we were doing it. But it wasn't working to begin with. So it's only those souls that choose to opt out of that system and begin to ask questions that they begin to have a different experience in life, that they begin to go down a different path. And it is the path of higher consciousness. It is the path of oneness, of unity consciousness. It's the path of the soul, right? It's all about the soul. Who's talking about the soul these days? You know, it's all about, you know, our daily life and activities, but who's taking the time to drop into the space of emptiness and commune with the soul and say, how's it going today? What is it that I'm not doing perhaps that needs to be done? What's the next stage of my life? Like that's really where we need to go when we go into these states of anxiety and depression, to drop in and see, what am I being called to do next that I've not been listening to? What needs to change in my life? So this inner inquiry is a very important part of life. And we have to find the support on this journey because the external world is not going to offer that support. Imagine calling into work and saying, listen, I need about another 2 weeks off to go through my dark night of the soul. And they say, oh, sure, we totally understand what you're going through. You know, you have our blessings, have a good transformation. And usually you need more than 2 weeks to go through these processes. But imagine a culture where we acknowledge and recognize the need to go through these periods of time of death and rebirth, of caterpillar and butterflying, over and over again. And it happens over and over because we can't just die to our false self overnight. The construct we created, called our personality, our ego, developed over time. And so if that ego structure cracks or breaks all at once, we'd lose our mind. So we go through these stages of cracking and reformulating. And after the aura is reformulated, after the ego is a little more expanded in consciousness and gets comfortable yet again with who it is, then we go to the next cracking. And this process happens over and over again. Dying, being reborn. Dying, being reborn. To the point where the ego no longer needs to apply its stranglehold on anything because it has merged with the infinite. It is in a space of trust, a space of forgiveness, a space of certitude, groundedness, presence. So the ego serves a purpose. It's not about getting rid of the ego. It's about supporting the ego in blooming and becoming totally open to all aspects of divinity, to being a receptor. A receptor. That's the true nature of the ego, the container and receptor for spirit. And this is a process that happens over a period of time. And we use the tools of suffering to help us go through this process, but we don't get attached to the suffering. We simply drop into the suffering and let the suffering dissolve us, not giving meaning to the suffering, but letting the suffering dissolve us. And then once we've integrated that experience of suffering from wherever it came from, once we integrated that, then we rise up. Grace descends and we rise. So nothing is ever useless. Everything is energy transmuting. The caterpillar's body still remains when it becomes the butterfly. We're not getting rid of anything. We're utilizing everything of the past, everything of our suffering, everything of our wounds. That's what this world is for. That's what the illusion is for. The raw materials for transcendence, but not to get caught up in the raw materials of the illusion, but to take the illusion, to utilize all of its aspects, and then evolve it inside. And then we become this transcendent being walking in the world. We're in the world, but we're not of the world. You see? We're in the world, but we've transcended it. So now we can actually support the transcendence of others on the planet through our presence, through our being. It's not a doing. There's nothing to do. Anything that is done is an extension of the presence, not of the ego, not of the self. I'm not doing anything at this point. I'm just showing up and letting it speak through me. The emptiness speaks, right? The universe speaks because there's emptiness inside. So this world is so important for the purpose it is here for. And it's here to pierce through the veil of illusion, take all of its substance and utilize it for the transfiguration of personality to soul, of the material world to the spiritual world. So what reality each one of us is living in this world depends upon the frequency of consciousness we're holding. The experience each one of us has in this reality, in this Maya, depends upon the frequency of consciousness we're holding. If we do our job and we die before we die, then each death increases our vibration, allowing us to have a different experience in this world. And more, you're moving from the old fear-based paradigm to the new heart-based paradigm. I call it the miracle paradigm, where you think something and it happens, where your need arises and the need is fulfilled, like a miracle. And the mind, in its right place, remains in awe. Wow, how does that happen? How did I just think about this person and they just called me? How did I just have this need for this money and the money just showed up? So that's the right place for the mind, is the awe, rather than I'm creator, I'm creating it. It's a union. It's happening in unity consciousness. So it's part of the whole, it's part of the oneness. And when we return to oneness, oneness responds because it's all one. So you see, this world can be a barrel of monkeys, a ton of fun, if you know how to play the game. If you know how to utilize the movie that you're projecting into the world, and then receive the information from this movie about yourself to know what the inner work is I have to do. Then you do the inner work. You die to the false aspects of the self. Your consciousness is raised, and you start to see the world for what it is, which is a playground of consciousness. It's just a playground of consciousness. If you're operating in lower consciousness, you're going to have that experience. If you're operating in higher consciousness, you'll have that experience. But it's all just information. For me, I rather operate in the world having a really fun time playing with higher consciousness. Like once I needed, I had to repave. It was never paved. My driveway, which is a very long driveway up to my house. And I contacted someone for a quote. And they said, oh, it'll cost you $40,000. And I'm just like, what do you mean $40,000? He said, yeah, there's a lot of work here to do. And I was like, I don't have $40,000. He's like, well, if you want me to do it, you let me know, because I have a queue of people that want me to do their job. And so whoever, commits first gets it. And I really needed this done because it was just eroding from all the rain. And so I said, okay, give me 24 hours. Let me sit on it. And I came in the house, I sat down and I said, okay, we need a new driveway and it's $40,000. And this guy can do the job and do it ASAP. So what do we do? Where is this money coming from? And I just sat and I waited and I got someone's name to ask them for a loan. I said, great. Called them up. They said, yes, no problem. And then I had a brand new driveway. Like, that's the paradigm of there's a need. And instead of the ego going to the place of I can't, it's not possible, I go to the new paradigm of anything is possible. Anything is possible just for the asking. If it serves the highest good, that's always the caveat. Does it serve my highest good? So because I know this, because I know of the precept, ask and it is given, sat down, tuned in, asked for support. Where do I get these funds? Got a name, called, yes, job is done. No stress, no worries, no figuring anything out, just an openness and a receptivity. And this is how the game works, if you know how to play it. That we're not alone, we're not separate, we're part of a greater whole, and that whole wants to maintain wholeness. So if there is a need for something, then the wholeness fulfills the need. Make sense?